Born Poor Die Rich, and today we're going to talk about, how could we also be rich in mindset. And I think in the midst of times like these, where there's so much going on, one very important thing for us to consider, an area that can still be strong, still be firm in the midst of all these other things that's going around, is really our mindset, and it's something that we can control. So, Dr. Roy, I know you've been a speaker for many years. You've been in the personal development realm for over 20, 30 years. Could you share with us some thoughts on perhaps the mindsets of people that you see coming to some self-improvement seminars over the years?
I think this is a great topic. Hi, everybody over there, and just want to send you greetings. I'm still in my office, which is a storage room, because we're still in the middle of renovating our house, but we're staying rich in our mind. We're going to stay in a positive place. It will eventually get over the line. This is a great subject, Daniel. Well done for choosing it. I think it's one that frustrates me a lot as a speaker, particularly in the field of professional and development, as well as wealth development. I think the whole philosophy, as we've shared a few times with Born Poor Die Rich, is that most people aren't born into this financial richness and this emotional development and awareness of what makes us rich, i.e. our health, our life, our relationships, our finances, etc. But what we do have is this untrodden path. It's like a blank canvas, and it's beautiful because we can paint that canvas as we get older. Now, of course, from 4, 5, 6, 7 years of age, we're still in that unconscious state where we're growing as a child, but there's a point when we move into adulthood and choices become more conscious. And I think that's the subject that you're picking up on really more here, isn't it? It's more that conscious choice to stay. Well, people say, yeah, but I didn't deliberately choose to stay like this. You don't understand, Dr. Rowe. I've been in this job for years. But if I actually rewound that person and took them back through their life to say when they were 20, 25 years of age, and asked them, okay, talk to me about some of the opportunities you came across. Well, yeah, this friend of mine, he started a business, but I didn't want to get involved. Another friend of mine asked me to come in as a partner in that. I saw this opportunity to go trading. I went to this seminar on property. It was like a 1 hour, and I thought I wouldn't do that. And actually, the reality is that along that path, where we start here and we want to be rich financially, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, etc. But certain things come along. So when we talk about, I guess the frame I want to put around this live that we're talking about, that you've raised a great subject on, is it's really about the choices that we make. And each one of those choices is simple crossroads. If you think of it as a series of crossroads, I take the right-hand one, there's another crossroads, I take the right-hand one again. There's suddenly another crossroads, and I take the left-hand one. It's about decisions. Actually, ultimately, it's about decisions, Daniel.
I love what you say about, it's the choices we make. But the interesting thing is we make choices all the time, whether consciously or subconsciously. And also, what you mentioned about babies. Someone once told me the only things that babies are born with is the fear of pain and the fear of falling. Like, if someone is sat on a chair and then the chair suddenly tilts back, you just go like, whoa. And you don't have to teach a baby that. But a lot of our mindsets and the way we think about things, the way we make choices, we actually pick up from our environments from young. I've met people that say you can never make money in the stock market, or you can never make money in property, or whatever. Right? It doesn't even have to be investment related, right? But their minds perhaps are already closed. They have already made a decision before even considering it with an open mind. So I think. And I think one of when I asked a little bit more, why is it that you think you can never make money in the stock market? And then the person said, because my parents lost a whole fortune, and they told me never ever to touch the stock market. But I mean, as much as it's a painful experience, and I wanted to acknowledge that, but we also know a lot of people who make money in stock markets. So it's not a case of whether you can or cannot. Yeah.
On that note, about a month and a half ago, I spent probably 4 or 5 hours with a 19-year-old lad who has since the age of 14, after his father died, has been trading the stock market and successfully doing so, and helps support his mother as well. So it's a 19-year-old young man. And I've got friends of mine that teach it over here and who trade. So it's a great strategy for the right people, if that's the strategy they want to do.
Absolutely. So a friend of mine has doubled or tripled his capital, just trading the markets as well.
I think a good question maybe to ask, and maybe I'll ask you and then you can ask me, is what would you say the basic mindset is of somebody in Singapore, Hong Kong, across out there in Asia, from a young age? What are we indoctrinated with? So I'll talk to you, I'll tell you about what comes from this side, from the European side. I'd be interested to see what the match is and if,
Sure.
what the difference is, because I think fundamentally we are essentially the same, and we get told a set of rules from a young age, as you talked about there. And so I'm interested to see what you think the rules are that maybe you or the people around you, the society has grown up with, that you have to follow. What's the norm?
Well, I'm not really sure what the norm is. I mean, probably it'll come to me a bit later, but what is really in my heart, and it comes just right to mind, is just the environment where I was growing up with, my immediate family, thoughts, and also, friends, people that I knew. And I think I grew up with the mindset, some beliefs I inherited is, rich people are selfish. Look at that rich person, they're this and they're that. And it is said with kind of like a negative tone. So I think one thing I realized in my own journey of personal development to where I'm at today, and it's still continuing, right? Because it's you're constantly rewiring what you have already been programmed for many years. So I mean, I'm approaching 40 in a few years. Imagine if I was not conscious about it, that over 30, 35 years of programming that has gone into here. It takes a very conscious decision to then think, okay, so that's one person's view. It may not necessarily be true. What is my view? And I think that's something that I really am still discovering.
As you're talking, I was going to try and draw something up. So to give you an idea of, in my mind, sort of a frame for this is a typical norm for us would be, okay, so you need to get yourself a good job. And in order to do that, at a young age, we are taken through a system. The system is you will attend school and you will conform to a set of rules, which is
study hard,
you have to go through your exams, take those tests, do really well, because if you don't, you're not going to be at a certain standard, which means you won't get a job in the future and you won't be able to get a great career. Everything is focused on this conformity of getting a great career. And I'm using the word conformity, and I'm not trying to provoke or create any animosity amongst other people, but the reality is we are born into a system where we are having to conform to a structure that is put upon us by our parents, who was put upon them, and maybe they saw something in their parents and thought, shit, I don't want to be like my parents, so I need to make sure my children are really strict. And so for us, it's get an education, get your exams to a high standard, work very hard towards that. And if you're seen to be anything outside of that norm, you're a maverick. Oh, no. You've got to toe the line. You've got to get back in. You go to university, you get your degree, you go into a structure which could be law, doctorate, civil engineering, any career, essentially, of everything from teaching up to whatever. And then we're essentially encouraged to get ourselves a house, which is a financial burden, get our families, get everything in place, and we're building a car. We're building a structure which is the same as everybody else. And as you were talking, something came to mind. I wanted to draw this up, and this is the challenge I think that people are faced when I meet them. If I draw S over here, the S represents, where am I going there? Society. This is the mass of society. And then on the right hand side, the F stands for somebody pursuing maybe freedom, emotional freedom, financial freedom. And this is a small percentage. So it's really difficult for somebody who's over here to emotionally see how they could move out of this, get away from the norm. It's like an elastic band. If I go too far, maybe I'm going to come away from the norm and I get pulled back to here. And whenever I've been over to Singapore and Asia, and every country is pretty much the same, but there are some countries there's a stronger pull towards this, just because we don't want to upset our parents, we don't want to break society, and yet the people that change society are the ones that are over here. We aspire to be like them, but for a lot of the time we're fearful to do what's necessary to be like them. Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely. And I think whatever you shared, it just rings so true, especially in the Singapore context. The whole thing about studying hard. You can't even imagine. My daughter is going into primary school next year. There is this huge thing. There is even an internet portal on it, and it's called kiasuparents.com. And I think our Singaporean friends will relate to it. The amount of stress just to think of getting your kid to what is perceived as a good school. just to give them a leg up to be able to start well in their education. And parents do like, I think, 80 hours of volunteer time just to secure a slot. And in fact, the slot is not even secure. You just have a better chance at getting into the school. The amount of stress, you haven't even got into the school. The amount of stress trying to get your child registered into that school is tremendous. So I mean, I just share that as an example.
And what do you think? Because I know it's the same thing here. We have something called an 11 plus exam. Now, an 11 plus, when kids get to 11, they can take the 11 plus exam, and if they pass it, they go to a grammar school. They go to a specific type of school where the quality of the education is higher. And of course, if you go back to the societal thing, they maybe get closer to the center of that high income part of society. And I've seen parents who I've coached and have come to me, and even within my own family, actually, I've seen it, where the stress on the child is actually been brought upon them by the pressure from the parents, because the parents don't want to be perceived to have a child that failed the 11 plus exam, because there's a stigma attached to a parent now. Oh, how did your son do? Didn't he take the 11 plus exam? Well, he didn't do so. And all of a sudden, he didn't pass it. So it's crazy how as these young children are now becoming emotionally molded by a pressure from our parents, which is a pressure from our grandparents and society.
Yeah,
and I don't want to offend anybody, but it is a poor thinking when we are driven by someone else's need or societal structure to force us to do something. And that's when you and I have this philosophy that poor and rich is also a mindset, not just financial wealth.
Absolutely, and in fact, perhaps it's more a mindset than just the financial wealth. And we're really going into what is above the iceberg, and we see the action, but what is under the iceberg that's driving that. And so, like, even comparing kids' results, it could be, is it the parents' desire for more approval or acceptance or status, that if my kid does really well, I mean, the equivalent in Singapore is called the PSLE, and the government is also relooking into that to see, to make it not so differentiated, so the kids are not so stressed. I mean, they're only 12, right? And it's almost like you're graded into streams where these are the very bright kids, and these are the normal kids. And in fact, there are streams in Singapore where it's called normal. But because of this achieving mindset, it's not normal to be normal anymore. People want to be
exactly
in the express stream or a special stream in my time, as it's called. So I remember, really mugging really hard to try to get into what is called a special stream, and everybody wants to be special. But if you just think about it, if everyone is special, then who's special, right? And what's normal?
And special according to whose standards? And this is the other challenge we have. I mean, I remember being in Singapore. When I first met you, I was on stage. Robert was there, Robert Kiyosaki, and he and I were backstage. He went up first. I did some stuff on property afterwards. And one of the messages that was common between he and myself was he was talking about the rich dad poor dad mindset, and I was talking about property investing. And he talked about, as a property investor, you kind of have to be a maverick. You have to be outside of the normal thinking, because if you were normal thinking, you would be risk averse in every way. You wouldn't take your money out of the bank and put it into a property, because if you're rich dad poor dad mindset, the concept is that you're a job working, putting your money into savings, and it's safe in the bank, which in reality it's not really, but that's what our perception is. And he talked about that. And when I was on stage talking about it, if you remember, I was talking about taking equity out of your house and investing it into maybe a business where they give you a return, or possibly putting it into a property where it gives you a return. And people were like, oh my gosh. And I remember seeing different types of reaction in the audience there in Singapore. Some people were like yourself, it's like, oh, this is amazing. So we can actually do this, build some passive income. And other people were like, oh gosh, I don't know about that. I've worked all my life for this. That feels risky. Yeah. But what is riskier? Taking your money and putting it into something that's going to give you a return that's an asset base that can produce an income, or leaving it with another body who's doing something with your money and giving you a fraction of a return on that money, and it's not really growing for you.
Yeah.
So it is about looking at it from a short term and a long term, and asking serious questions. And one of those questions is, am I making this decision based on fear, or am I making this decision based on emotional development? And that's that whole thing about back to the fork again in the road. I've got my choice, left or right. Okay, you know what? Just for safety, I'll go right. Well, that's a fear-driven decision as opposed to an aspirational decision.
I think that really resonates. And one of my clients that I'm coaching, he's in his late 40s, and he's you were sharing with me that throughout his life, he's never invested in a property per se, because he in fact he calls it that he has missed the boat, because there were lots of opportunities, but he was just couldn't take action because he was just fearful and being a very cautious person. So I mean, one thing I shared was, it's really about mindset, and firstly getting knowledge to know how to manage those risks, because I mean, everything is risky, right? You think about, you cross the road, you drive a car, there are more people that get killed in road accidents than people dying from plane crashes. But we still drive, we still walk on the road, because we have learned how to, look left, look right before we cross the road. We mitigate the risk. And it's the same in business, isn't it? Like, if you put ourselves
Exactly.
in an F1 car, if you put me in an F1 car and ask me to go, at like 300 kilometers, I think I might not walk out alive. But if you put like a Sebastian Vettel, he goes for like 50 laps. Is that still a risk? Absolutely. But
True.
he's just so trained. He has the right knowledge. He has the right training, and he just does it, and everyone cheers.
Although I have to say, you drove my Tesla for probably a couple of hours, and you did pretty well on that one. So a little bit of coaching, and you were fine.
Yeah, the Tesla kind of drove itself. So
That's true. That's true. I think that's a very good point, actually. How do we mitigate risk? So the whole concept of being poor and born and dying rich is along the way you make decisions, and those decisions have to be based on aspiration, as we talked about. But then, in order to make those decisions the right decisions, it's about making the right decision and then making the decision right. And how do we do that? We mitigate risk. So we start to say, right, what do I need to do to make this investment a safe investment? And of course, one thing would be, for example, getting educated in the right way. And then you decide, what level of education do you need? One thing is to watch us doing some free videos. Another thing maybe to take on an audio program, go to a seminar, get a mentor. You'll decide on the level. So that's one definite way to mitigate risk. The other thing is to diversify and not have all your money in one basket. So someone sat there. I mean, one basket to me is one job. You're in a job, suddenly, like my father, at 36 years of age, became paralyzed. He had a stroke. So my father is the classic.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah,
He's
so
even younger than I am now. Yeah.
Yeah, so very conventional education, highly educated Sri Lankan man, came over to this country, had an early stroke in his late 20s, but had a major stroke at 36 and totally paralyzed him down one side. He went blind. No financial security at all, a little bit of money in savings in the bank, never even considered investing in anything else. So when my father passed away, there was nothing else. When those forks in the road came along, he didn't make the choices that would provide maybe a financial security in the future, but maybe he didn't think he needed that because he thought, well, I've got a brain, I've got a body, I can function, I've got a savings account, I've got a bank account, but that's just one egg. That's it. You just all your eggs are in one basket. So it's about mitigating. And I mean, I just recently borrowed £70,000 from a company who are giving me 60%. It's only for 3 or 4 months, but that money sat in a bank account at less than 1%. They get the £70,000 back plus the interest. It's done as a loan. If you think about it, for 3 or 4 or 5 months, it's with me. I've got assets. It's secured there. So that is a mitigated risk because the money's been lent to someone that has already assets in place to have security. So these are tiny things that we have to consider.
Absolutely, and I know that we talk about how being rich is not just about money, but sometimes it gives us a good handle. And I think when it comes to money, that's where a lot of emotional triggers, either greed or fear, there is there. Yeah. So I remember one of the lessons I learned about mindset very early on from one of my mentors is he said, how much money are you getting in a bank? And I said maybe 1%. Nowadays, with some of the banks that are a bit more fancy, they offer. If you credit your salary and you spend on a credit card and yada yada, you get maybe 2%-ish, even though that has now come down with the recent rates. But let's say for the sake of argument, 2%. And then he said, okay, what if you can make 6%? And you could come to me, you could come to someone and borrow money. How much money would you borrow? Now, and he asked it to a room full of, I think, 100 or 200 people. And then there were lots of answers. Some people said maybe $100. Some people said 100,000. 100 is too little because I'm going to make the difference, right? I only pay 2% on the interest and I earn 6%. I'm going to borrow 100,000. Then the mentor went on to say, okay, so any other guesses? Somebody said 500,000. 100,000 is so little. 100,000 you're making 4%. 100,000 would be 4,000. So 500,000 is 20,000. I want to make 20,000.
Yeah.
So it went on and on. And in my mind, I was like, 500,000, that sounds scary, borrowing 500,000. And then somebody said 1 million. I was like, no, definitely I'm not going to borrow 1 million. And then at the end of it, somebody said, I'll borrow as much as I can. Infinite amount, as much as I can, 100 million, 1,000, $1 billion or more, 10 billion. Then everybody was like frowning and like, no, this guy is nuts. Why are we going to borrow money? It's dangerous, it's scary. And then the mentor basically just said, well, I told you the cost of the money is 2%. You can make 6%. How much will you borrow? That was the question. Why isn't everybody else wanting to borrow unlimited amount so that you can make the difference? And my mind just, I just froze. And then some people started saying, oh, but what if you can't guarantee that 6% return? And what if you this, and what if you that? And then the person just stopped everyone and said, these are all assumptions that you put in your head. I just said
Exactly.
You borrow at 6%, you borrow at 2% and you make 6%. How much will you borrow? That was a question. So so interesting that excuses we come up for ourselves.
Yeah. So basically what's happening is, and this goes back to the psychology of poor thinking versus born poor and keeping that poor thinking, is that they have created a set of validating beliefs which support their fear. Whereas he's making a statement, it's 2 and you definitely get 6. How much would you borrow? Immediately, they wrapped a whole model around that and made loads of assumptions, fear-based assumptions. And that's the difference between the rich thinking and the poor thinking. And my early mentor, American chap, in fact, I met him just recently in Singapore when I was over there speaking in November when I met up with you last.
Yes.
He was over at an event speaking, Jim. And he said to me, how do you feel about borrowing money? And I said, initially I was a bit nervous. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to build a portfolio to £5 million when I started. I thought that was one of my dreams, £5 million. He said, well, in order to have a portfolio of £5 million, you're going to have to be prepared to borrow at least £3 to £3.5 million, if not more. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, because you're going to be building a portfolio where the banks will give maybe 70% and you're going to have to put 30% in or borrow 30% depending on your current situation. So in order to be a successful, educated and wealthy investor, a rich investor, part of that is using leverage. And he said that leverage comes from the banks, who, by the way, have much more risk in this because the banks are coming to the table with 70, 75%. They've assessed the investment. They can see the return for themselves. They can also see that the property's bought for this much. You're going to add this much. And over 10, 15, 20 years, it's going to grow to this much. So they got a lot more skin in the game. So from the bank's perspective, the more they can lend, they get a small percentage on a large amount of money, which is why banks operate on lending billions. And my brain completely changed. Same story you're telling, but in a slightly different perspective.
Yeah.
And I know it's a game changer.
Some people listening like, wait a minute, I got to replay whatever they just said. But you know what? I think the point we're making in this is that if your mind, I think I just read this quote today as well. Someone reminded me of it. When the student is ready, the master appears. And it's so true because I remember 100%. When I was like, feeling frustrated. I wanted to grow my income. I wanted to grow my investments. But there were deals all around, but I just didn't have the right mindset. I didn't have the right knowledge, the skills to see it, but they were there all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, it's a tiny switch. I'm just going to do some numbers very quickly. So as an example, for somebody that's confused about the numbers, let me just draw this up very quickly. So if you take a property in the UK for, say, £133,000 and you get a 75% mortgage, that means, I'll do this in red so you can see it, what the bank is lending here is that large chunk of money. That's the 75. That's £100,000, 75%, £133,000 property price. So they will make maybe 3% on that money. And they make 3% on that money on an interest-only basis for the next 25 years, if you take it out as a 25-year mortgage. If they want to make more money, if they could lend on 100 of those properties, they're going to make a huge amount of monthly profit. So from a bank's perspective, they look at this, they look at the model, they look at the profit, the return, and they look at the risk, and they say, this is an asset, it's being bought for this much, it's going to probably be worth more in a year's time, definitely in 10, 15, 20 years' time. And all of us, when we're looking at this, we have to look at things from the perspective of not what we're going to make now, but what we're going to make in the future. Because in order to be born poor and die rich, we can't have a short-term thinking, we have to have a long-term thinking.
Absolutely. It's so funny.
singly most important questions is what's my long-term gains, not my short-term gains.
It's true. Yeah, having that long-term focus. And it's so funny that you and I keep going back to property because that's a big passion of ours. But even
Yeah.
for people who are not in property, you just think about it this way in terms of mindset and money management. Another one of our mentors asked me, "What do you think is the inflation rate?" And I think most people would say it's 4 or 5%. And then he said, "That's what perhaps is published, or that's what people tell you. Based on your purchasing power, do you think it's 5%?" And some people say maybe it's more. And the next thing he said really blew my mind. He said, if your money is not working harder than 4 or 5%, right, essentially you're losing money every year. And I was like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? I can't understand that. And he said, if your money is earning 1 or 2% in a fixed deposit, and your inflation is 4%, that
You're
simply
losing.
means you're losing 2% every year. And imagine over 10 years. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, that just blew my mind.
And that's money that you're taxed on prior to it going in the bank account as well.
Yeah.
So you add all those other factors in as well.
Mm.
So I think go back to your initial question. The main challenge is that people, when they're faced with a decision, if that decision is outside of the mass of what everyone else is doing, in other words, the belief system of the group, it is very hard to make that jump. In order to do that, we have to evolve. We have to develop as a human being, and we have to have a different set of beliefs that allow us to break through that comfort zone and start to make those steps. And the other thing is that and you know this about myself, I don't like when people sell a big dream over here and say that you can do it quickly, because neither are you and I saying this. What we're saying is the opportunity is there to do it and to create that richness, but it is going to take steps. It's going to take a journey. And I don't like it when people are sold on an idea that you can do it in an instant, because that's not true. And that's where trading, for example, gets a bad reputation. Come and become a successful trader in the next 2 weeks. No way, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. This is funny because we're all working from home. I need to open the door for my wife to get her laptop just a sec.
Okay,
so, Dr. Roy, just give them another example or analogy of how one can be rich in mindset.
Yeah. So I think the other thing on this as well is time. So that's the other challenge for those of you that are watching that I've come across, is that I get two main objections. One, if I'm in front of an audience of say 1,000 people, and there's an opportunity for them to make a change, make a transformation, start a business, do something different, release some funds to go and invest in something else, they often say this: "You don't understand. I haven't got enough money, or my money's safe, or my wife or my husband won't let me do it, and I don't have enough time to do it." And that's the other area that people are poor in, is the belief that they don't have enough time. We're all born with the same 24 hours. If you look at Richard Branson, a billionaire, if you look at other people who are financially successful, they have the same 24 hours. Elon Musk, the same 24 hours. Somebody on the street who is homeless, that is struggling financially, has the same 24 hours. So this whole concept of I don't have enough time is something we've created up here. And then you might argue with me and say, "Oh, but Dr. Rowe, you don't understand. I've got 2 kids. I work long hours." Correct. But how did that come to fruition? Who made the choices to take you to that point? And then you say, "Yeah, but you don't understand. When I grew up, so I was told, I had to get my good education, climb the corporate ladder, got married, I've got my kids, we made that decision, so I don't have enough time." Granted, but the person responsible for that is you. And that's where I had to face that myself. I went through divorce in my late 20s. I found myself in a situation where, in a vulnerable place, where I'd moved back into a tiny room at my mum's house at 30 years of age, or wherever I was, 30, 31 years of age, back in the same room I was at when I was 18 years of age before I left to university. I remember sat there on my bed crying, thinking, "Fuck, what's happened to my life?" But they were all a result of the decisions that I'd made all the way through to that point. And I went through a huge change then, where I started to make decisions based on me taking responsibility for everything, the good and the bad. So I think that's the other thing, Daniel. And I don't want to that's probably a conversation for another live, but the point I'm trying to make is that that's the other area where people are poor in their mindset, is not believing they have enough time. Actually, they have to change that and say, "Okay, in order to create this wealth for myself, I need to now drop the TV, stop watching TV, stop doing all this surfing on the internet and going and looking at all this rubbish. How much time can I win back? Can I win back half an hour to an hour a day to enable me to work on myself and to grow and to become rich in time as well?"
That's such a great tip, which I also picked up from you. And today in our house, I'm pleased to announce we don't even have a TV.
Yeah,
I
good.
mean, that doesn't take us away from our own screen, so we still need to control, use of the
Correct.
laptop or the
Yeah.
phones. Even when
But
we
it's a
had a
different
TV,
mindset, isn't it?
absolutely. It's about I remember I think you said something like cut the plug and free your mind.
Yeah.
It's
That's right.
literally
Yeah,
about
it's one of my
mind.
phrases. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the thing about time that you said is so true. And some of our listeners might be thinking, oh, that's a bit provocative, some of the things we have said. But I think that's the reason and our heart in sharing these videos, and we're doing this out of our own time and at no cost to you, is we really want to not just tell you what you want to hear, but I think what is really helped us, first of all. And I think we'll be able to help if there's just one tip that you take away from this video. And I know it's a relatively long one, and I know Dr. Rowe has to scoot off in a few minutes. But he's just in his nature. He's just so sincere. He just wants to add massive value. So if in just 30 minutes or so that you've been with us, if you just take one thing away, I think that would be a massive blessing to both of us. And the thing about time is, I love this quote. If it's important enough to you, then you will find a way. If it's not important to you, then you'll find an excuse. And isn't that true?
Yeah, it is so true. And I think start to think, maybe we can tackle this as a separate call, a separate session, is start to build beliefs that will support where you want to go instead of reinforcing beliefs that have kept you where you have been. And that's a massive distinction. What have you said to yourself? It's like Daniel was saying, 2%, 4%, and people started making excuses. Oh, I'm only going to give £100 because of the risk. Other people are like unlimited. What distinguishes somebody saying, okay, I'm going for the big picture, as opposed to somebody staying small in here and staying safe? Because staying safe is based on a set of beliefs that you've had from the past, and those beliefs can be changed. Every single person watching this video right now has the ability to change their personal circumstances, to have a better relationship, have better health, have better communications, have more wealth in your life, have the time and the freedom to do what you want to do with passion and with joy and without upsetting other people. And if you have a fear of upsetting other people, and that becomes a reason why you don't want to be financially free and to have richness, that's because maybe somebody implanted a belief in you somewhere in the past that being wealthy is a bad thing. And it is not about the money. This whole thing about money as the root of all evil is a misquote from a biblical statement, which is, I think, the love of money. Every single person watching this has the right and deserves to be financially secure. You just have to choose the right vehicles, and it doesn't have to take away from what you're doing. You can still be a lawyer and have other vehicles on the side. You can be a dentist and have other vehicles on the side. But just being a lawyer or a dentist, if something happens to you like it happened to my father, and suddenly financially you're crippled, where's the security for your family? This is really about looking after the long-term plan for the family.
Yeah, I remember being we can go on and on, but I remember being in my early 20s, and people were telling me, why are you learning about money, self-improvement and investing and all these things? Let's not be so money-minded. And I remember when my dad had a stroke, and we were thinking, which class of award should I put him in? Or when my son, then, we had a fear that he had a hole in the heart. And the doctor was telling me, it's going to be a very expensive treatment if it's found positive. And there's this procedure that we're going to do, it's A or B. A is more accurate, but it costs a lot more. And B is, we're not very sure, but it's cheaper. Which one do you want? And I was like, A, definitely, because we had also made our own planning to be in that position. But I think when it's your I'm even getting emotional as I say, your loved ones and their lives are at stake, then you have every right. In fact, you have a duty to take care of them. It includes every area of your life. But I don't care whether you like numbers, or you're not good at math, or you have your limiting beliefs, or anything. You have a duty to take good care of your loved ones and make every decision to do so.
Yeah, I agree. And, I remember that period, and it was a tough one, but there was no hesitation in you or Joe because of how much you wanted to look after him. So I think, for me, the final message really, because I'm conscious of time as well for everybody, is be mindful when a decision is in front of you and notice the energy of that feeling. Now, this might, if you're a very heady person, you might go, what the heck is he talking about? But just slow it down, just slow time down for a moment. And as you're making the decision, because decisions are made in a second, ask yourself the question, where's this coming from? Is this coming from an aspirational place? Or is this coming just from a fearful place where I'm just keeping close? Because how can you receive if you're like this? And I'm trying to protect. And there's nothing wrong with protecting, but one way to protect is actually to create something bigger and create more security. And that would be a good way to leave from my side with that message. Just ask the question, where's the feeling coming from? And if you keep track with us, we'll give you tips and tools on how to manage this, because it may be that we're stirring up some emotion and possibly some reaction, and we're here to support you through that.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dr. Rowe. And I think a final message on my end, that's something that you spoke about, is you spoke about being happy and finding your passion and being at peace. And I think as us doing this video, you know, there's just this, you can't fake it, right? The enthusiasm, the sincerity, the passion that we have to help others on this journey as well. So, I mean, you know, Dr. Rowe was sharing about society and freedom. And not everybody might be called to be mavericks and to do something different or to create. Some people might be, you know, really great in that job, you know, and you just are so dutiful, you love what you do, and that is fine. So I think the acid test of that is, are you happy? Because if you're not, then, you know, tomorrow is the start of the rest of your life, right? You can do something about it to create a better future for yourself, for your family. So I think with that, I'm just so thankful for Dr. Rowe. Sorry, we ran slightly over the time, but thank you so much. For those of you who haven't already followed us, we have a YouTube channel. It's Born Poor Die Rich as well. Or you can check out our website, bornpoordierich.com. So till the next time, signing off, this is Daniel. And Dr. Rowe as well.
Dr. Rowe, thank you so much. Thanks, Daniel.